Wait, this is real. It's actually here. Hot diggity, we finally got the System Shock Remake and it's not a dumpster fire. In fact, it's pretty good. Great even. Some folks even say it's Typhon levels of good, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. I've been waiting for this game since shortly after the Kickstarter was funded way back in 2016, and I was also lucky enough to get a bit of advanced access to play the game over the weekend, although I did buy the game on my own because I like to make a point of doing that. Like, man, I have some old gameplay footage. Like, this is the original Unity demo from back in the day, and this right here is the pre-alpha from, how many years ago was this? Man, I just can't remember. It has been long. Speaking of which, let's just go over the background for the people clicking on this video that somehow don't know the lore around the System Shock Remake. The System Shock Remake was first proposed as a Kickstarter with an attached demo of the first segment of Medical Deck. The Kickstarter was posted by the studio known as Night Dive, who have a reputation for remastering classic games to work on modern systems using the Kex engine, including the original System Shock. The Kickstarter did very, very well. But then things got a little wiggly. Development was repeatedly delayed, so much to the point that the System Shock Remake is the reason why I have my 3 strikes rules for delays, aka 1 is fine, 2 is troubling, and at the 3rd delay or more, drop all your expectations and just be happy if the game ever comes out. Yeah, I don't know how many delays System Shock Remake accumulated over the years, but you know what? It's here now. These delays were brought on by all sorts of woes and hiccups in development, including most likely underestimating just how much time and effort it takes to completely build a game from the ground up while staying true to a revered source material, and also along the way, I guess they probably had to redo a lot of what they had already worked on thanks to realizing that the Unity engine just wasn't up to the task of what they wanted to do and switching engines. Fun little fact, System Shock 3, while it was still openly in development, said that it was going to be on the Unity engine right at around the time Night Dive made the announcement that they were switching away from it. We haven't heard anything good, or frankly anything for that matter, from System Shock 3 in a long time. But System Reshock, as it is sometimes called according to the directory, is finally here, and it's a hell of a good time. I'll admit that I was kinda about it at first, which was in part from a bit of ennui I had after playing the original game so recently, but as I just let myself play the game instead of constantly comparing it to the original, I was having a ball. Let's go back to something I said earlier. This is Night Dive's first full-on game, not rebuilding something in the Kex engine and prettying up the sprite work, but their first built-from-the-ground-up game. Yes, they were recreating a much older game, but there's a big difference between remastering something and completely remaking it, and on top of that, if anything, doing a faithful remake of something that has been around for so long that, you know, like, okay, we pretty much have to start from zero, might have even ended up making things harder in the end. Night Dive did very well here for their first outing, all bumps in the road considered. And you know, now that I think of it, in modern day game design, what even is average for going from zero to finished product for a full-blown game these days? Because somebody tell me in the comments, what's the average? Is it 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? I honest to God don't know. Games have gotten so bloated lately that I can't tell. Screw it, let's actually talk about the game before I get too depressed about this. Let's just look at the gameplay for a second, and then we'll get into the fancy stuff like changes and additions from the original game. I checked the older maps and my own footage from when I played through System Shock Enhanced Edition. System Reshock is almost a perfect recreation of the original game's maps and locations. It is uncanny. There were many points where I accidentally skipped certain steps of objectives because I already knew where to go or what to do, despite this technically being my first time playing this game. Speaking of which, if you're curious, according to my footage, it took me 17 hours to get through all of System Reshock, which oddly enough is about 4 more than the original game took for me. Which is especially surprising considering, like I just mentioned, I didn't need to figure things out. I already knew what to do in a lot of situations. So if I had to guess why, despite there being very few quote-unquote new things added to the game, it's because the fully 3D environment makes things a lot more fun to explore and goof around in. It's definitely not a difficulty thing, and we'll get into that in a sec. 17 hours is pretty good for a linear first-person shooter, or linear quote-unquote, not that MMO crap we just had to deal with. System Reshock captures the original MMO of the game well. Ammo is scarce, an entity that has complete control over every aspect of the space station you're on is just tearing the place up, and she does not like you, and she has the power to literally just drop enemies on top of you. You get most of the old guns and a few new ones, the stims, the splodies, and your wits. Oh yeah, and a cool set of cybernetic implants, don't forget about those. Those are actually much easier to use now than compared to the first game. Even on easier settings, it's gonna be a hard crawl to get through all 10 levels of Citadel Station. There's kinda one thing I should mention that I'd feel dishonest if I didn't include, which is that if you played the original game, particularly if you played it recently like I did, for at least a third of the game, you're gonna get this weird uncanny valley feeling as you play, which I'm gonna write off as a result in part the similarity and also in part with the musical direction. The original System Shock had tunes, very video gamey tracks that were loud, present everywhere, and generally pretty nice to groove to as you ran like hell from the giant cyborg things. System Reshock goes for more ambient music that's on the level where I'm pretty sure a lot of the tracks do that thing where they're mostly silent or nearly silent, except for certain swells every like 30 seconds or so to remind you that they're there. It gave me that vibe like going back to an old school years later and nobody's around, or going to an empty store in the dead of night. At least for me, it went away at around the executive level. Honestly, I think this is less the game's problem and more of my own problem. Like, my brain's getting confused as to how the hell I know the layout of this area that I've never been to before. That sort of, again, uncanny valley feeling. I think this could be a me problem though. Right off the bat, the game feels much shootier than the original, which I think is less about the changes to the core game and more because it's just easier to shoot the guns now. As far as I can tell, you can't crouch and prone, but you can still crouch and lean or just lean, and that's all we need. Thanks to monetizations that we'll talk about in the next segment, it's a lot easier to load and switch between your weapons, with the only exception being that if you run out of one type of ammo, you gotta menu through switching to the other type manually, but this might be different if you're playing with auto reload enabled, because I didn't. Every fight in System Reshock is tense. There's a lot of looking for corners to hide behind, scrambling to apply a health patch in the 5 seconds you get before the cyborgs catch up to you, and you will burn through ammo. You will try every trick in the book to win a fight, and there will be very few encounters where you will not be worried about if these guys are gonna kill you or not. There's gonna be a lot of backtracking to where you know you can get more health pickups or to a safe place with a surgery bed to heal you to full HP, and there will be a non-zero amount of just having to run away from encounters because you are not in the right position to deal with the enemy being thrown at you. I also really enjoy that just about every weapon is viable to take down just about any enemy. Sure, some weapons are going to be better than others, and using something like the railgun on something like a mutant is a bit of a waste, but there's no, you must switch to this specific weapon to take out this specific enemy or else your suboptimal playstyle will get you killed in a second. Nope, none of that. Anything is fair game if you keep your head on straight, and there's only like one straight up upgrade between weapons, which is the starting pistol and the Scorpion, which use the same caliber of ammo. I really enjoy how System Shock strikes a great balance between any weapon being viable and every fight is going to be tough. I'm playing on just default difficulties. There are harder difficulties, which I'm not sure I'm gonna go back and do because I just blitzed through this game in a weekend, but maybe I'll come back again and do like the ultra hard run sometime later because I know for a fact there are certain things I did not find. Also, having a hotbar is a welcome change from just having this many weapons from your inventory, and pro tip, go into your settings and change it from the sorted to standard mode because that was a big annoyance for me until I realized I was just being silly and forgot to check if I can fix that, which you can. I think it's just a bit silly that the game's default is like a segmented hotbar, like saying like, oh, you can only have 4 weapons equipped and then have this many spaces for explosives, where I personally play with weapon heavy playstyles. I only really use detox and health patches. I rarely use grenades unless I'm like intentionally trying to AoE, so that playstyle fits for me. The more you know. This game has a lot of accessibility options, by the way. Just take a poke through. Like you might notice compared to other people's videos, I chose this color for the UI because I like purple. Now, since we just talked about the gunplay, I should address something that I saw in a lot of early reviews for the game. Sure, while the game might be hard if you're used to movement shooters or battle royale type shooters, the System Shock Remake is actually much easier than the original game. They've added new things that allow you to get your hands on some ammo much easier, instantly game overing if you die in an area where you don't have the cybernetic conversion chamber fixed doesn't happen anymore. In fact, if you die at a floor where you don't have the resurrection machine working, you just get rezzed on the nearest floor that you did have it fixed, with some exceptions in certain scenarios. The instant game over in these circumstances now only happens during like boss fights or on certain levels unless you are intentionally playing on the hardest difficulty, where now that is like part of the challenge. In the original System Shock, that was just normal. That's another thing that Night Dive stayed true to in the remake, which is that The difficulty settings are entirely customizable for each aspect of the game, with some minor differences, such as now turning the mission difficulty all the way down gives you modern day Elder Scrolls style waypoints, according to the description. I didn't need those, because I kind of already had it all in my head, and I'm a big boy. I'll give you all another concrete example about how it's easier now that's a little spoilery, so go to here if you don't want this. You know that maze? You know, that maze? Well, Night Dive has made the conscious choice to not have the exploding Roombas of Torment start spawning until after you complete the puzzle to deactivate Shodan's shield. Before, in the original game, they would spawn in non-stop, and you had to try and complete the puzzle with all the death Roombas coming at you constantly. I intentionally saved a logic probe for the entire game to make sure that I had one for this particular moment so I would not have to try to solve the puzzle while fending off death Roombas, only to be relieved that I wasn't immediately assaulted as soon as I entered the Hell Maze. Then there's how there are far fewer instances of cameras being put in absurdly hard to reach places, like that one that was on the executive level's elevator lobby. That's not there anymore. You know, the one where you had to find a random switch on the other side of the level that's in a very hard spot, like blink and you'll miss it hard to find. Also, the initial Diego encounter, which there's 2 of those now by the way, is much easier, but we'll get to boss fights later. The core story and mission of the game is pretty much exactly the same, save for a few minor tweaks and a bit of extra world building. Turns out my error in the previous video was a little prophetic, as now Diego is overtly being investigated for dabbling in mutagenics instead of just white-collar crime. Shodan herself is a little more fleshed out, but your goals remain the same. Stop the laser, stop the wacky hijinks in the grove, stop Shodan from torrenting herself onto Earth, stop Shodan. Again, I kid you not, I was able to use my footage from the System Shock Enhanced Edition and forum posts from over 20 years ago to double check things when I was feeling stuck playing this game over the weekend before the official release. There are some changes, and actually let's get into those right now. That sounds like a cool idea. Let's do that. Okay, for what's new, for starters, Night Dive has done their best to fix cyberspace. Sure, these might hurt your eyes a little with all the bright colors, but at least you can tell what the heck is going on now. Kind of. The hotbar helps you figure out exactly what everything does, so now I actually know how to use the drill missile thing, and also you're able to find your way around thanks to there being, you know, like walls and stuff. I remember a lot of the original game had me spending time in hacking segments because I had simply no idea where I was supposed to be going thanks to the wireframe design, which I'm not really gonna show because I'm pretty sure that's like an epilepsy hazard. By the way, I'm gonna try and be careful about stuff in this game because there's a hazard for that in this current iteration with lots of sparkly lights and stuff, but I'll give you a warning on the screen. By the way, this is everything we need to say about hacking segments. Let's never talk about them again except for something in spoilers. Now let's talk about the obvious thing. This is now a full 3D game with modern day graphics, and they look pretty good, particularly the animations and the monsters. They did a really good job bringing the mutants and cyborgs in System Shock to life. I forgot to write this down, but one of the things I personally like are the Audrey 2s from the Groves. They're not just giant tentacle monsters anymore. They're like plantoid things that hide in the grove like they camouflage. You can't immediately see them. They kind of jump out at you. It's not like super duper AAA DLSS ray tracing hell, and I'm totally fine with that because I'd rather have an aesthetically pleasing game that opts for little nods, like when you zoom in you can see the pixelation, which is very much intentional and a nod to the original game, instead of say having a nearly 100 gigabyte mess that only looks good when you're holding still. And if you're curious, the download is a little over 8 gigs after it's decompressed on your hard drive, which I am 100% here for, because even after I fixed my internet and got everything working again, I don't need every AAA game hogging up like all my SSD space I have allocated for games. The game looks nice for the most part, but sometimes in certain areas with certain lighting, certain objects can look a little too shiny in bright lights. The way I can describe this is like, you know those video posts people used to put out like every month or so where some moron decided to try and port Mario assets into the latest iteration of the Unreal Engine and everything looks way too glossy because they didn't bother to fiddle with lighting at all? Like that kind of feeling. Like I remember people doing that a lot with the original BioShock back in the day, and it always looked like they had covered everything in a thin layer of oil based on like how it was shiny and reflective. Like they had just blasted blasted the Big Daddy suit with a bunch of like spray-on sunscreen. This only seems to happen in certain areas with a lot of direct lighting though, and I'm not even sure it's going to be too obvious for all of you, especially after like my own compression with OBS and then YouTube's compression on the final product. And hell, this might be in my own head, I just remember a lot of this. Like, you know, for my own sanity, I remember this being really bad in the pre-alpha demo, and let's just directly compare. Like, okay, this is how shiny everything was in the pre-alpha, here is the shiny it is now. They've worked on the lighting a lot and it's better, but there is still a little bit of it there. I'll still take whatever this is, especially considering how minor it is, over the over 80 gigabyte downloads with all the baked-in lighting and 4K textures. And after the graphics, the weapons have been reworked too. Most of the original staples are there, and some stuff is changed in name only, such as the dart gun now being the mini pistol, which you get at roughly the same time you would have got the dart gun. The key difference is now it takes light caliber bullets instead of darts, which is most likely because the late game Scorpion has now been rolled into the flechette, which is just outright gone, and it's a replacement for the mini pistol because it takes the same ammo, but now with the Scorpion, you can have a max capacity of 30 and you are full auto, which is great for just dumping into enemies that sneak up on you. I was bummed at first when I heard about the flechette going away, but now with the grid-based inventory, it makes total sense to get rid of one weapon entirely and then have two already existing weapons use the same type of ammo. Now, instead of needing at least 3 different slots for all your types of ammo, you just need that one. Speaking of ammo, multiple types of ammo are still a thing, but thankfully, I'm fairly certain there's no meaningful limit on the stack size for ammunition. You also get the shotgun much earlier in the game in place of the flechette. And the shotgun was in the original game, but you got it like you were in executive level by the time you were able to get the shotgun, which now, instead of getting the shotgun in executive, you get the railgun. I like this change to the progression because by the time you originally got the shotgun, you had much better stuff and just didn't bother with it. That being said, my thoughts on the remake shotgun begin and end at, why am I still keeping this in my inventory? It's not even a very efficient backup weapon for when I'm low on ammo for the stuff I want to use. The assault rifle is now a burst fire weapon too, which makes a ton of sense comparing it to the original, and you can now no longer fire the railgun so fast that you accidentally shoot one projectile with another and blow yourself up. In a cool twist, the railgun now fires one extremely powerful shot that requires a recharge period in between firings, which you can expend your personal energy to speed up. Also, the mag pulse feels nerfed. It kind of feels now like a mid-game weapon instead of a cool surprise you found in the early game, which, you know, like back then you had to ditch it because you wouldn't find ammo for the next third of the game, but while you had ammo for it, it was pretty much an I win button. Now the mag pulse is the, oh crap, I'm out of ammo for everything else weapon, like even after the shotgun. I don't know why I kept the mag pulse for as long as I did. In fact, I think I ditched it at one point, only to begrudgingly pick up another one because like, oh, there's a bunch of ammo for this now. Another thing they've changed with the weapons is now there are modifications for them. They cost quite a bit of money and are a one-time thing though, so choose wisely. Most of these are either straight up damage or ammo efficiency upgrades, and for the damage ones, you get a visual change to the weapon, which also makes it take up more space. I'm okay with it because it's not something you need in order to keep up with the enemies, and it's also my one gripe as a Greenbeard and DRG so far is that my guns don't get cool little tweaks as I upgrade them. System Shock taking the Bioshock path of weapon upgrades is totally fine by me because I'd rather have a cool new look for my weapon than a minor buff. I'm not getting it for the minor buff, I'm getting it because it looks cool. And the way they're priced and how they are, it's a serious decision since the cash you need for buying a single weapon upgrade can get you a lot of med patches. Speaking of buying med patches, there are now some modern touches added to System Shock, such as vending machines, an item scrapping system, and then taking all that scrap to a recycling station to get coins which you put into the vending machines. There was always just junk laying around in System Shock, and there was nothing really stopping you from picking up everything from beakers to heads that have been removed from their shoulders, which you can still do the latter, but only in one specific scenario that was part of the original game. Part of me is kind of bummed about this because this falls right into that ideology of like every last object in a world must have some use to it, which we see a lot of in modern games, which when I did need to start scrounging for stuff, I kept thinking, man, I wish I had the recycler grenade from Typhon right now, since especially when your inventory is close to full in the later game because you're carrying a bunch of crap around, it's a pain to grab a couple things, scrap them, grab another couple things, repeat until you have enough scrap to afford the thing you want. Also, I just don't like how the game doesn't let me scrap functioning weapons or stim patches I'm not going to use. While you can scrap the broken weapons you get off defeated enemies, there's a bunch of extra duplicate guns you'll find as you're going along Citadel, and all I can think of, like, wow, these look like they could make a lot of scrap. That's totally lame. Please, let me be dangerous enough to scrap my own weapons. I will win all the stupid prizes for the stupid game I play. Just let me do this. Now, as for the vendors, they're just about everywhere in-game. But no, they are not a bottomless source of health and ammo to be exploited so long as you're willing to scrap every last doodad you find. Most weaponry-related vendors will only have 2 things of ammo available in them, if even 2. Usually there's sometimes like only 1 thing of ammo available and no one's coming to restock this kiosk. There's also the vendors that sell the weapon modifications, which are usually in either very hard to get to or very hard to find places, and there will only be one specific upgrade for one specific weapon that is nowhere else in the game but at that spot. Finally, with the stim vendors, I don't think I was ever able to get more than 4 med patches out of a single one, with most only having 3 in them. And again, no one's coming to restock that, so you also need to be careful about when you decide to start milking the vending machines. I kind of get this vibe that this was meant to be replacing what I talked about in the Enhanced Edition video, where if you were hurting for health and pickups, you'd just go down to medical and farm mutants until you got a bunch of med patches, and then you'd go back to where you actually were in game. Now, very, very rarely do early game enemies drop any sort of meaningful pickups. And finally, because you've probably seen it a bunch of times in the video so far, there's an inventory now. You can rotate things, you can move things around. You can even find some extra inventory space to put more things on your person if you're keyed-eyed. You even get an 8x8 storage box in the form of a dumbwaiter that usually stops off near the resurrection machine, where you can store extra ammo or weapons that you don't need right now for later. I guess this is nice because now you can theoretically have more weapons and healing items on your person than before, and it's very easy to assign a rotation with them thanks to the hotbar, but remember, this is not Resident Evil. You don't get to stop time while you fiddle with things, and it is a very bad idea to be fiddling with things for a long time when you are not in an area with 0% security. Then there's all the little bits that were added, like extra voice acting for all the monsters or more audio logs, which I'm pretty sure weren't there before. It's always nice to see Alex Lee getting more work, and I'm excited to see his take on half of Ina in Dream Barbecue. Then we've got the weapon animations, which are all pretty cool, and when combined with the audio, work really well to sell how punchy some of the weapons are. One of my personal favorites is when you overcharge an energy weapon, like the spark gun, it starts visibly arcing as you hold it. There's also more subtle touches, such as the assault rifle or the scorpion having a different head-up display depending on what type of ammo you're using to save UI space, and you know what else is added in the animations? Overkill. Not just jibbing, but say if I decide to fire an overcharged spark gun at an enemy that can barely withstand a normal load from that gun, it's going to tear the enemy in half at the point which I hit them. Personally, I think this is more fun than jibbing, just to see how obscenely damaging you can get something. Like, sure, like blood confetti is nice, but just watching an enemy like just see nothing but their legs left over is just even more fun and gives more feel that like, Jesus, this thing is so powerful, like it didn't even like have its inertia slowed down by going through that person. The puzzles are also changed from those little puzzles that felt more like trial and error to these gate puzzles you're seeing here. There was, keyword was, another kind of puzzle that was in the pre-alpha, which I did not find anywhere else, but who knows, maybe it's on harder difficulties. These kind of feel like a combination of both the line puzzles and the path-making puzzles from the original, presented in a way that makes it easy to understand what you are actually doing here. Speaking of tweaks to the game, there's a few minor ones here and there outside of what I said earlier, such as various implants being much less energy intensive and much easier to use thanks to UI and hotkeys being assigned. Now the jet boots and the speed boost boots are treated as the same implant, which is on by default once you get them, but only active when you sprint. I'm fairly certain that the flying now uses way less energy, but is balanced out by having a set height limit until you get an upgrade. I found myself using implants a lot more than I did in the original game, just because it was easier, like not having to menu through everything, and the less intense power usage meant they were much more accessible if I also wanted to use an energy weapon. The only thing I found odd though is that the Enviro suit is now an active ability instead of a passive, and it constantly drains your power whenever it's on at a slow rate instead of being again that passive that only activates when you're in a dangerous area. And lastly, for little tweaks, I'm fairly sure this unusually convenient for Citadel Station resurrection machine seated right next to a surgery bed, seated right next to a recharge station on the systems engineering level, I'm not sure that was in the original game because I looked all over that level trying to find some respite to the hell that is systems engineering. At least this means I don't have to trek all the way back to the reactor level, which is the next nearest surgery bed without it. Okay, time for some changes that are spoilery, so you know what to do. For one, there are more boss fights now. You fight Edward Diego twice. One, where it was kind of an analog of his original form from the original game, which now happens in his secret little office on the executive level, where you would have originally fought a bunch of elite assassin cyborgs and secretary robots, and then you fight him again where the original Diego fight was. Except now he's a beefed up version of the endgame cyborg, and he gets a whole battle arena now instead of just a random spot where you happen to be. Also, Cortex pods are treated like boss battles now, and they often have key items on them that you'll need to grab if you want to progress. And finally, they fixed the Charlatan fight. Yes, it is still in cyberspace, but this time the hacker gets physically projected into cyberspace after a fight that actually felt a little harder and more complex than its original counterpart, and you get the cyber gun. It's basically just the pulse rifle, but this is a million times better than what we had before. Now, the hacker must fight his way through waves of those things you fought during the cyberspace segments, but now they're much tougher because you can't spam the drill missile. All the while, you're taking pot shots at Shodan's true form because even if it doesn't do anything, it feels good. You also get a similar ending that's now much better because we didn't do this all in a hacking minigame, and if anything, out of all the hacking games in the original System Shock, the final boss fight is the worst. Like, even if we set aside the fact that, like, just comparing it to everything else, like let's say it's not a boss fight, the final hacking segment where you kill Charlatan was easily the worst in the original game. Also, since we're in spoilers now, I can say that they made jettisoning the Beta Grove a much cooler thing now. I mean, just look at this. Before we put a bow on this, I'm sure there's a question many of you are asking. How Imsimmy is it? Is it an immersive sim at all? I originally had a whole section dedicated to this, but I realized that all I need to say about it can be done in like a few paragraphs and a much shorter amount of words. System Shock is based on a game that is a proto-ImSim. The term hadn't been coined yet, and the core tenets of whatever you think an ImSim is hadn't really been formed yet, and I'm pretty sure box stacking wasn't even possible in the engine they were using. Yes, it's where we get 451 from, and at the time you could do stuff with your abilities that was very impressive for a game, but not what you'd expect from a game that like rocks CO 451. That being said, I feel like the remake streamlines some of the ImSimminess out of the original game. Now that we're in a fixed first-person perspective, we can't do stuff like trying to shoot around corners by taking advantage of being able to shoot anywhere on the screen instead of just at the crosshairs. We can't mantle things anymore like we did in the original, but mantling's little brother, crouch jumping, is still an option. That sounds okay at first until you realize that there is such a thing as severely limiting where you can go. But I guess the more efficient version of jet boots makes up for the loss. The existence of vendors came with a side effect that now lower level enemies are significantly less likely to drop med patches, so you can't farm medical deck anymore. There's still some emergent gameplay and ImSimmy things you can do though. You can trick cyborg assassins into throwing mines in a way that'll clear a whole group of enemies for you. You can hack enemies with the right implant, which unfortunately I did not find in my playthrough. You can use the jet boost to get to all sorts of places in ways that you weren't really meant to get there and skip a lot of puzzling segments, which makes your life a lot easier than intended. Just make sure to pack extra batteries. I don't think any of this matters though. Night Dive set out to remake System Shock, not make an immersive sim. That sounds contradictory at first, but hear me out. Before all this discourse, System Shock was known as a dark and creative first-person dungeon crawl set in a cool sci-fi world. And that's what Night Dive made. Rather than trying to build out a bunch of systems that could be used in every which way, which would likely break the original levels as they were, which they worked so hard on trying to keep those as accurate as possible, Night Dive opted to hone in on the dark, tense crawl that was System Shock's combat while touching up the story, graphics, and combat in a way that made the game stand on its own. It's modernized just enough to make the game comfortable while still being true to the original, to the point that, again, I was literally able to use old footage to double check what I was doing as I was playing the game. They took a game from almost 30 years ago and made it play like something brand new, which is an amazing feat in and of itself. My final thoughts on the System Shock remake are that in today's climate of pointless RPG mechanics, loot systems, and crafting, it's a breath of fresh air. Sure, it streamlines the original gameplay a bit, but it focuses on being an intense adventure through Citadel Station, all while an antagonist who is a very real threat to you at all times is advancing her plans and able to get you at any time. I don't need to stack boxes in this one because I'm already having a great time blasting my way through the station and getting through rooms by the skin of my teeth. In spite of all the things that have happened between 2016 and now, I'm interested to see what Night Dive can do for the System Shock 2 Enhanced Edition, and fairly relieved that they aren't going to try and remake that one from the ground up because I don't think anyone thinks System Shock 2 needs a full remake. This is worth your time, even if you aren't familiar with the original, and if anything, I'd suggest doing a reverse chronological playthrough where you play the remake first and then go back and play the enhanced edition so you can really appreciate how far the game has come. Also, it's going to help you a ton playing the older edition if you're already roughly familiar with the layout of the maps and what you need to do. Do not forget to write those numbers down. That's gonna do it for today. The next thing you'll most likely see from me is Amnesia the Bunker, which might not come out as fast as this video did because I didn't have advanced access like I did with System Shock. Be sure to do all those things that you need to do now because algorithm, and if you're feeling generous and able to, I always appreciate any and all pledges over at patreon.com/charlatanwonder. Now let's sign off. Remember that no matter what you do, be it pencil sketches, MIDI songs, or woodworking, what you do is not content. It is art. Content is a word that has been twisted to mean a way of taking your creations and making them into nothing more than fuel to grind up into a gray slurry that serves no purpose other than to make some line go up on some executive's behalf. Your art is better than that. Your crafts are art. It has your passion, your experience, and it is inalienably a reflection of you by the nature of its creation, and you are not something that should be made into a corporate slurry. So get out there and fight against the march of content by fighting for your art. Stay saucy, everyone. Laundry boy, are you gonna sit and get all your shed-ins all over the laundry? All over my freshly cleaned bed sheets? Just barely brought this back from the laundry room, and you're acting like you own it. I'm taking a pet, I'm not even asking. Giving you scritches. I know you're in a mood, because you were trying to be a clean boy in my laundry, but I don't want you shedding on the bed sheets. Or my gym hoodie I see here. Sir. Well, you know what's going to happen now, right? I'm going to start folding all this, and your laundry mountain's going to disappear. Don't you get all shaky tail on me. You were all over me when I came home, but now like, oh, you're just getting in the way of my laundry. It's not your laundry. You don't even wear clothes. You have fur. Why are you just glaring at my right hand? What a dork.